Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Hope you are well. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. And we finally have started this one now after a couple of delays, but we are here. I don't think we've ever done one in the middle of the week like this before, right? So on Tuesday. But it's number 100, so sort of like a special occasion, right? Okay. Do we have us in the chat? Assalamu alaikum. I've watched your channel for almost 2 years. MashaAllah, thank you. Very informative videos. Jazakallah khair. And Assalamu alaikum. Ayman, good to see you as always. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, brother. Good you're alive. Could you give your opinion on the recent division, ritual, non-ritual? Recent division? I don't know what you're referring to there. There's always been a division among the Qur'anists, you mean, regarding if the Salah is a ritual or not a ritual? Is that what you're asking about? No, I've always thought it's a ritual. I think it's pretty obvious that the Salah mentioned in the Quran is a ritual that you do for remembrance of Allah, right? So when you do something ritualistically, meaning regularly, you do it to instill constant remembrance of God, right? That sort of thing. So that's what I think. I know, for example, our brother Ayman, he actually had he did a presentation on this channel in one of the streams where he's arguing that it's not a ritual. It's saying it's getting severe and people are takfeering each other. Hold on, it's saying the browser has lost connection. Why? Has my browser lost connection? Your browser has lost connection to your camera. Well, I'm not using a camera. Okay, that's what it means. Never mind. It's getting severe and people are takfeering each other now. Well, that just shows, that it's issue, right? There is a bit of sectarianness, sort of a sectarian vibe among some Quranists. But it's surprising as well, because the idea of takfir isn't even in terms of like saying what you're not a Muslim. That isn't even really a Quranic concept, is it? Because when the traditionalists use it, they use it to mean somebody's outside of the fold of Islam, right? Well, what does that mean, the fold of Islam, right? What they mean by that is the sort of like the boundaries that they've made for their sect, right? So the traditionalists will have a boundary. They've said within this is Islam. What they really mean by that, of course, is their sect, right? When once say somebody's a kafir, they say you've left outside of these boundaries of our sect, right? And that isn't supposed to be something which is present, right? In the Quran, there's guidance, right? And then there's levels of guidance, right? There's Iman and there's levels of Iman, right? But yeah, I don't know what's going on in that. I don't know who's takfeering who. I don't know, and not really wanting to get involved in that kind of stuff. Why the Quran says fast until night instead of sunset, as we always do. Well, sunset is in the Quran when the sun disappears, right? So at sunset, night in the Quran is when the sun disappears, right? So if you take a look at the verses, like for example, Surah Al-Shams, the Surah of the sun, or the Surah of the night, Layl, they mention that basically, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَاهَا وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا, right? By the night when it covers the sun, right? So when the sun disappears, it's night, right? When the sun, you can't see the sun anymore, now it's nighttime. Okay, nighttime doesn't mean dark. Nighttime means when the sun is not present anymore, right? So it is at sunset that it is night. I didn't expect to get into a question and answer right now, but let's go through them. Why not? And what do you think of the US issue? Not to mention, I entered a Discord server where Qur'ans were trying to convert me to their sect. What the US issue? You mean the election of Trump? Yeah. I mean, I was hoping people would vote for Jill Stein, even though people would say that is a vote for Trump. To me, Trump or the Democrats or the Republicans, they're the same in the end, right? They're all basically Zionists. In my more malevolent moments, I would hope that the worst president wins for America to, hasten the downfall of the American empire and that sort of thing. But you have to hope for the best for the people over there, and just hope that enough people wake up to be able to initiate real change. But I mean, what are we going to do? America is what it is. If it wasn't for the fact that it acts like the world's police, we wouldn't care about who the president is over there, would we? Thank you, brother. The way you're kind of unaware of this polemics is very good. Yeah, I'm a bit busy for checking any kind of internet drama. I suppose that's what it is right now. In terms of Rashid Khalifa, what about him? Sorry, I didn't get that question. What do you think of the US issue? Oh, that I don't know. So Rashid Khalifa, of course, the whole claim that he's a messenger, I don't accept that. Then with that comes the whole 19 thing, right? The code 19. I was actually recently having a long back and forth about code 19 on Reddit with somebody, and the thing about code 19 is it doesn't have a root in the Quran, right? So I know they use those verses, upon it is 19, and we have not made the companions of the fire except angels, and we have not made their number except a fitna, etc. From those verses, you just can't extract that there is a code 19 in the Quran, right? You just can't extract that, right? The number 19 being brought up in that verse is purely about the angels of hell, right? And it's a very interesting verse because it's saying within the next verse, it's saying that that through this, the Ahlul Kitab will be able to have will not have doubt, so that they will have more certainty and not have doubt. Now, why is that? I'm guessing that there's something as yet it seems undiscovered, which is in the books of Ahlul Kitab, which is about the angels, the number of angels in over hellfire, right? So by having that number and them seeing that correspondence with the Quran, it's seemingly like it would give them faith. But there's something unique about that which is related to Ahlul Kitab, right? I don't know what it is. Maybe it's as yet not been discovered, but it's there. I've put forward the idea that if indeed the code 19 turns out to be true, it will not be because of those verses about the angels of hell. It will probably be sort of like a signature within the whole Quran of the Bismillah, right? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is 19 letters, right? So it'd be kind of like if there's so many mathematical congruence within the Quran around the number 19, then it's sort of like a signature that the whole Quran is, in the name of Allah, the Almighty, the Merciful, right? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. That's what the Bismillah says. In the name of Allah, the Almighty, the Merciful. And it's 19 letters, and having sort of this mathematical code running through the whole Quran, right? Of a congruence of multiples of 19, etc. Then it's sort of like a signature throughout the whole Quran that it is, all in the name of Allah, the Almighty, the Merciful. So that's what I would say about that. And then, of course, there's a controversy about, making the count stick by removing 2 verses from Surah At-Tawbah, right? So in order to make some of the counts stick, they say, okay, we're going to remove these last 2 verses from Surah At-Tawbah, and one of the justifications for that is that the hadith about how these 2 verses were the last to be added to the Mus'haf, to the when the Quran was being compiled by Zayd, and they were only done so with the testimony of one person, right? So then there's that idea. Now the issue of that, of course, is you could make the count by removing other verses. So if because one of the things about the Quranists who follow Rashad Khalifa is they're skeptical of hadith. So why are you accepting this hadith? Well, you think, okay, well, it seems to be clear because you could remove those verses. Now this code works. Okay, fine, I can accept that. You can say, okay, the code works, but does the code work by removing some other verses? I don't think anybody's looked at that, right? So if you could remove some other verses, a verse here or a verse here from the other surahs, can you still make the code work and keep those last 2 verses in Surah At-Tawbah? Okay, because if you could do that, then there's now you have the problem of which actual verses are you going to remove to make the code work. And I've also thought about, okay, let's say that it is only those, you need to remove those 2 to make the code work, because the idea behind this code is that it will help us to identify what is part of the Quran or not, right? So that's what they would say. The fact that the code gets broken by these 2 verses, and there's some hadith indication of weakness of these 2 verses being part of the Quran, then it's indication that they're not part of the Quran. All right, so let's say that they're not. I would say, first of all, that they are clearly revelation. I mean, anybody who has, who understands the Arabic and can, and has an ear for the Quran will be able to see clearly that these are verses of the Quran. That the justification they say, for them not being is also that it gives a name of Allah to 2 names of Allah to the Prophet, or 2 qualities, Ra'uf and Rahim to the Prophet. But it's a weak justification because other verses give attributes of Allah to other prophets as well, right? So Ibrahim is called Halim, Yusuf is called Alim. Other prophets are given names or attributes which are similar to Allah, right? So I don't think that's. But what I would say is that you could read those last 2 verses on Surah At-Tawbah as being sort of like separate from the Quran and as a kind of signing off, right? That because what do they say, right? They say لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ عَزِيزٌ عَلَيْهِ مَا عَنِتُّمْ حَرِيصٌ عَلَيْكُمْ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَءُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. A messenger has now come to you from your Lord. So you could read that as saying, like, the messenger he's finished with you. لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ, he has already come to you, a messenger from your Lord. He's finished. He's done his job, right? It's done, right? And so now if you turn away, then you, O messenger, say, God is enough for me. And the rest of the ayah. So it'll be sort of like a kind of signing off, right? Separate from the Quran, almost like, I don't know, what would you call it, an epilogue or something like that, right? Sort of like a signing off that the Quran is done. Because also, on the other flip side, the Fatiha is not really part of the Quran, right? If you take from the Quranic perspective itself, Allah says, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِنَ الْمَثَانِي وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ. We have given you the 7 often repeated ones, which is obviously Al-Fatiha, right? The 7 verses of Fatiha and the great Quran. So even in reality, really, the Fatiha itself is not exactly part of the Quran, but it's still revelation, of course. It's still part of the wahi that was sent down to the Prophet. So you could see the last 2 verses of Surah Tawbah in that kind of way, I suppose. I mean, these are weak arguments, I think, to be honest, but I'm trying to put myself in their shoes and give some justification for the code 19, right? So there is a code 19, I would say that it's because of the Bismillah, not because of those verses in Surah Al-Muddathir, right? Maybe because the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim has 19 letters, and that's a kind of signature code throughout the whole Quran. That's one thing. And I would say about the last two verses of Surah Tawbah that they are still definitely revelation, just like Fatiha is, but they'll be sort of like separate from the Quran, if that makes sense. Anyway, we got into, I don't know if there's more stuff in the chat, but I want to get into this presentation. Now, I was actually quite reticent about doing this. Once I decided to do it, and then I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? This is a huge topic, right? The idea of spiritual journeying and wayfaring towards God. It's a very, very big topic. And am I going to be able to say what I want to say in it in a presentation? Obviously not. There's so much to talk about in this one. But, it was something that somebody requested from me. He said, why don't you talk about a little bit about what you can say or what you've learned about the idea of a spiritual journey, the spiritual journeying of spiritual journeying towards God. Let's just leave it at that. Let's give this a go and see if I can explain at least some of the things which I've come to. So, what is meant by it? Okay, what is meant by spiritual journeying? Right. So it's described in many different ways. Right. Described like an inward return to God. Right. The spiritual journey is what? It's an inward return to God. Another way it's called like a journey of realization. Right. That through a spiritual journey, you gain realization, okay? And realization of the self or the world, right? Another way that it's an internal ascent, right? To higher levels of awareness and consciousness, okay? It's also talked about like it's about gaining true knowledge of reality through sort of direct experience, through taste, through your spirit actually being able to perceive the reality directly as it is, right? And that's it's described sometimes as taste to indicate that it's almost like tasting something to see what it is, right? That it's that kind of direct experience. Another thing that's mentioned is that it's gaining true gnosis, which means real knowledge or deep knowledge to one's capacity of God, right? And in the end, it is the real fruit and the inner core of religious teaching, right? That at its core, right, the revelations from God and religious teachings are all wanting to show the human being how you can go through this spiritual journey to however it's described, as a return to God or journey of realization or internal ascent, etc. Okay, but you'll see if you look at all those definitions of it, you'll see that most definitions are understandings. They come down to two general things. One, true knowledge or realization of yourself, of the self. So he's talking about realization, the internal ascent, right? Gaining true knowledge, right? Gnosis of self, these sort of things, right? Going to higher levels of consciousness. So we're talking about realization or knowledge of the self, of what you are. And two, true knowledge or realization of the real, of reality, of the world around us, right? That's what, if you try to distill them, you'll find that you sort of have these two broad ideas, okay? And with a little bit of contemplation, you'll see that these two are actually two sides of the same coin, right? And that's why you have the famous Sufi saying, "Man arifa nafsahu, arifa rabbahu," which is it says basically whoever has gnosis of himself gains gnosis of his Lord, right? Or whoever truly knows himself, then he's already come to truly know his Lord, right? And it's the same, which has different levels. Other ways we can talk about it, in terms of like once you know the pitfalls of yourself, the troubles of yourself. When you know the maladies of yourself, then you can cure it and therefore gain upon that you gain knowledge of your Lord. That's another, there are different levels of understanding the same. But why is that? Why is it that that if you know yourself, you will come to know your Lord? Well, for you yourself, you are a part of reality, right? You are part of the great reality, and without knowing deeply what you are and how can you know deeply what is other than you, right? If you don't really truly know what you are, how in the world are you going to know what other things which are not you are, right? Including your Lord, right? How can you possibly know something if you have this ignorance of yourself? How can you know what is other than yourself when you are the closest thing to yourself? And another way you think about it is sort of understanding where you end and the rest of reality begins. Okay, and the where in quotation marks you and your ubudiyya, your servitude where is that? Right, where are you in terms of your ubudiyya, in terms of your servitude? You're not, and versus where your Lord is and His lordship, where is that? So you're not going to understand where your Lord is and His lordship lies without first understanding yourself in your ubudiyya, in your servitude to your Lord, if that makes sense, right? A slave cannot know his Lord, who his Lord is, until he understands his own slavehood, right? His own ubudiyya, his own servitude. You're not going to know your Lord without knowing what you are first. Okay. So what is the nafs? When they talk about this, the Sufis and others and other mystics, they always talk about the self, right? The self or the ego and these sort of things. It's the idea that we have here. Man arifa nafsahu arifa rabbahu. Man arifa nafsahu faqad arifa rabbahu. Whoever knows his self, the nafs, right? What's called in Arabic the nafs or the self. So what is the nafs, right? What is the nafs? What is the self, right? If we have to know it in order to know our Lord, then what is that? Right, if that's part of the ascent of consciousness is that of the self, then we need to know what is the self, where is it, and sort of understand it. So here's the basic the idea, right? If the human being was created from physical matter, right, clay, God created Adam from clay, right? Then what happened? Then He breathed into him of His ruh, okay, of His spirit. Thus telling us that what is the human being? The human being is body, right, and ruh, body and spirit. Okay, if that's what the human being is, where does this nafs, this idea, fit in? The idea of a nafs or a self, where does that come into it? And the simple idea or description of it is that it is sort of the welding of the spirit to the body, because the spirit is something lofty, right? It comes from, in Ruh min Amri Rabbi, right? The Quran says, right? It's from the affair of your Lord, and what you know of it, what you've been given knowledge of it, is very little, right? It's something lofty, something high, right? It's spirit, right? And the body is a physical thing. How are you going to connect these two things, right? How do these things connect? And the way they connect is through the nafs. So the nafs is what results when the spirit, the ruh, is mixed in with the body. It sort of connects the spirit to the body, okay? And the sort of spirit, which, and the spirit is endued with a lot of things. It has knowledge, it has power, it's something much more otherworldly, right? But the spirit then gets anchored into the body, right? And that anchoring of the ruh with the body, the mixing of the spirit in our actual flesh, our arms, our feet, our eyes, our the physical heart, right? The anchoring of the spirit into that part of the spirit which is mixing in with the body, that is the nafs. That is the nafs. Okay. So that part of the spirit, which sort of you can also think of it in terms of it facing the body, that part of the spirit which is focused on the body, on the physical world, on the matter. Okay. And so because of that, it is what we experience and think of as us, right? When I think of myself as me, or myself or my nafs, what is that me part? That me is that spirit. Usually when we think of that spirit, we don't tend to normally think of our spirit as separate from our body. When you think of yourself as me, no, that me, the spirit part of the me, is that spirit part which is also mixed in with your body. Okay, because it it feels most directly the physical sensations and so the physical body. So when this nafs, this part of the ruh, this part of the spirit, right, when it turns away from the body, but it is still connected to it, that's sleep. Okay, that's a way to understand sleep. So when you see a sleeping person, and when Allah says, that He توفى الأنفس حين موتها والتي لم تموت في منامها, God takes the nafs when it's asleep, at death, and that which doesn't die, then when it sleeps. Okay, just turning away, right? So you have two states. There's a state where it can turn away from the body, okay, and that's where sleep occurs. And in that state, it's turned, away from the body towards the higher realm, and because of that, you can have those spiritual dreams, which come to the nafs through the ruh, through the spirit, its other part. But when that mixing, when that connection between the ruh, between that connection between the ruh and the body, i.e. that mixing, the nafs, when it's severed completely from the body, okay, and it gets reintegrated into the ruh, fully absorbed back into ruh, what is that? That is death. Okay, that is what is meant by death. So this gives you sort of an idea of what we are, right? This sort of like picture should give you a kind of idea of what we are. We are spirit, which is this lofty thing created from the amr of Allah. And then there's the lower physical body. And then there's what connects them and mixes and is mixed together, that's the nafs, okay, the spiritual part of the ruh, which is connected to the body, if that makes sense. Okay, so when you say whoever comes to know himself truly will come to know his Lord. So knowing yourself for what you are, which is a created being, to be in ibadah, while you don't know that, while you don't know that, you won't fully have the realize. When you don't have that fully realized in every fiber of your being, how can you know your Lord, right? With every fiber of your being. That's another way of seeing that statement. So the idea of asking yourself, do you know what you are? Do you know what the nafs is? Does your nafs truly know its Lord? Okay. What kind of nafs do you have? Right? What is that part? How is that interacting? Okay. How can you come to know that nafs, and then have it know its Lord? Right? Have it know its Lord truly as He is, in such a way that it completely submits to Him. Okay. In a way which isn't just natural, but just is. It's unthinkingly is. Okay. How can you have that nafs part of yourself be in that kind of submission, because it knows its Lord deeply? Okay, so that is a sort of the point of the spiritual journey, for those who take it seriously. It's to have that nafs, okay, be in complete submission to its Lord. Okay. Okay, so also knowing the nafs, right? So some will talk about things like, you've heard this before, I'm sure, achieving the higher self. Okay, so you find some gurus talk about it in that kind of language, connecting with my higher self, they will say, right? Sometimes they will talk about, connecting with your higher guardian angel or something, right? But it really isn't about that. It's really about changing into your higher self, right? Changing into your higher self. It's the alchemy of the soul, right? The changing of iron into gold, okay? And it goes through stages. So where do you start to know your nafs, right? The general starting point of iron, because that's where most people will start off. They're not going to have their nafs in complete submission to God with all of the higher qualities. They're going to be in a more base state, right? So how do you start thinking about that? So the easiest way, I think, is to you start thinking about it in terms of from where we all started. If you want to talk about the journey, the spiritual journey, then you have to sort of begin at the beginning, okay? How all of our nafs started, which is from the nafs of a child, right? From the nafs of a baby. You start off as a baby, and you become a child. That's when, when was the spirit blown into the body? In the womb of our mothers, right? And so that's where the birth of the nafs is. That's where the birth of the nafs is. And from there, right, it develops, right? So you become, you're born as a baby, and then you become a child. And then you start to see some of the qualities that you might have in the nafs, right? So if you just think about it in terms of, in a very primal way, okay? Like we said again, the nafs is that connecting part of the ruh to the body, okay? And the body is really no different from an animal body, right? The body, the human body, is not that much different to an animal body, okay? Through it, the nafs, which is mixed with the body, feels the desires of the body, okay? And the very first ones experienced, as a baby, are the desires for just the pleasures of food and comfort, right? So that's what a baby mostly feels, right? Hungry, right? And desire of food and desire of comfort. Not feeling comfortable, I want to be comfortable. Okay, so when the nafs is in this state, you can call it sort of like the animal nafs, right? That nafs, all its focus, right, is on fulfilling the bodily desires, right? Fulfilling the bodily desires. So it can also be called the nafs al-shahwaniyah, right? The passionate nafs, right? That what it wants is just the desires. Okay, what it seeks is its animal instincts, right? Firstly, as just basic instincts for survival, right? Hunger is the body's signal that it requires food. So as the baby, as the nafs, you feel that in your nafs. You feel the desire for food, okay? It's thoughtless, it's innocent, completely innocent. It's instinctive desire for what is needed, okay? Without thought or addiction to pleasures or any of that, right? You just start off, that's where it starts, okay? But fast forward a little bit, okay? And in such a way, you'll start to see that the excesses of this lower animal nafs, they start to get learned, right? Baby and the child, slowly they start to learn excesses with regards to the desires for the bodily passions, right? And so that becomes part of the nafs, right? That becomes part of nafs, a desire above really what is needed. Okay, and it's innocent. Again, it's still, these are things which are learned somewhat innocently in the beginning, as childhood, as children and as babies. Okay, there's a reason why some of the qualities of small children are often compared to the qualities of animals, right? You think of animals as innocent, right? As just following instincts. Children, sort of like babies, are innocent and following instincts. Okay, you find it in sayings like how people will say how only animals and small children have undisturbed sleep, right? They just sleep soundly without a care in the world, right? They don't think much about tomorrow. They don't worry about the past, what happened, right? Little kids will very quickly. Another example of that is how if you see these nature programs where you have, for example, the antelope, right, and the deer, and a lion will come and hunt, and then they all flee and panic and run. But once the hunt happens, right, and the lion is gone, they very quickly go back to being calm, right? The animals very, very quickly become calm, completely calm again, right? They're not sort of like jittery and worried, have anxiety as when's the next lion attack going to come. No, they go back to being calm. Children as well are like that, right? They just, something can happen and then they just quickly go back to being in their normal sort of like innocent state, right? Still though, this is where for the human being, because we develop our intellect and we develop much more along than just the level of animals, okay? The roots of change in development of the animal self into acquiring attributes that are more devious or devilish, it starts there. Really starts even at that younger childhood age. Okay, even if it's innocent, right? That's where it starts, right? That's where a desire for more food, more sweets. Give me sweets, right? Throwing tantrums, then starting to lie to get what they want, right? Children start to lie, right? So they start to be having these sort of things start to creep in, okay? Born out of the desire for the bodily wants, right? So the animal side is in the desires for physical pleasures, which is at this stage are mainly centered on sweets and food, really, for the child, right? But a desire to experience these pleasures becomes more and more the best part of life, right? So the nicest part of life for the children at that age is when they get their sweets, right? This is what they sort of live for, right? It's something to be cried for and fought for. The child will have tantrums about it, that sort of thing. Later in life, right, much later, another physical pleasure will kick in, right? And the sexual pleasure and the pursuit for that as well. And then that becomes something which the nafs is addicted to, right? Because now there's another desire that the nafs wants, right? And again, it's something which is attached to the body, right? So what I'm trying to impress upon you here is that there's that part of the spirit, which is, again, a lofty thing, which is mixed with the body. It starts to become addicted and wanting and desiring more and more the things of the body, the things of the lower, right? But it's that thread of desire for bodily pleasure, and then that's been enamored with the physical world, right, and focusing on them. Okay, but it isn't just a focus on physical pleasures. As the child grows older, they start to develop into, there's other things. Then you start to get a love for possessions, right? This is mine, my toy. Nobody else is allowed to play with it, okay? And having ownership of things, and sort of this selfishness starts to arise, okay? And maybe, the reluctance to share, right? I'm not going to share. Again, wanting to lie in order to have more, maybe a love of control over others, okay, and getting your own way, right? The love of getting your own way starts to develop, right? And all of this, it starts innocently enough, out of a childlike, animal-like instinct, but these tendencies grow and mature as the person grows and matures, and they can also get mitigated and curbed by the rationality that develops as well. Right, so the child, maybe at 8, 7, these sort of, they start to curb their desires. So, take control of themselves. They don't just let their nafs go wild, right? Desiring this and that and just doing whatever. No, they start to maybe by themselves start to, I need to, exhibit a bit of self-control here, self-control and control over the nafs, right? And also there'll be parental guidance, interactions with others, which will, train them on proper etiquette, good things and bad things, these sort of things all can start to mitigate the nafs and prevent it from becoming too engrossed into this lower physical world and these sort of like desires, right? So that can happen, or you can have the opposite, right? So a person can use his developing intellect and their faculties to become, and use them to become a toolkit in their achieving their bodily aims and their sort of devilish aims and all of these sort of like lower desires. Okay, and so then that feeds the nafs, that feeds that part, and that becomes more and more willful, right? Environment also might be a bad one. Parental guidance might be misguidance, right? Instead of parents telling a child to share, they sort of push him to become more bullish, among others, take what you want from other people, right? So these sort of things. So depending on a person's upbringing and behavior, they may enter the mature stage of life. So now we're talking about somebody who's 16, 17, you're sort of like becoming more aware or even older, right? You're in a mature stage of life. You can enter that stage of life where you start to question about God and wonder about religious guidance, and you've entered that stage of your life, and your nafs could be under control, or it could be completely out of control, right? And instead, what it does, it's constantly inciting you to evil, right? So a nafs that is close to the animal self, basically, but no longer in an innocent way. Okay, that child time of innocence has passed. Now, the nafs is constantly inciting to evil and for its pleasures, and and it has qualities which are dark, right? Qualities like jahl, right? Anger, being quick to anger, rancor, right? Having this sort of like hatred to others, jealousy, okay, lust, right? Ambition, pride, arrogance, boasting, greed, selfishness, gluttony, sloth, bad character, right? So you can have all of these. Somebody could enter the mature, sort of like the young, mature stage of life, and they have sort of like all of these qualities have sort of become part of them, okay, because they've developed sort of from childhood, right? And without any sort of like checks and balances, right? So this nafs is the nafs which is mentioned in the Quran in the story of Yusuf, right? It's called the nafs al-ammara bisu, right? Inna nafs al-ammaratun bisu. That's what the verse says, that there's a nafs which is, adamantly inciting to evil. Okay, al-ammaratun bisu. Ammar is in like the emphatic. It's really pushes you, right? Pushes you to evil. What kind of? It pushes you to boast when you get the chance, pushes you to be greedy when you get the chance, to be selfish when you get the chance, to gluttony, to self, to arrogance, to ambition, to pride, to hatred, to jealousy, right? To jahl, to anger, all of these bad qualities, right? Now, is that a nafs that's going to know its Lord? Of course not, right? That's a nafs which is basically has shaitan is behind it in many ways. Okay, it's worse than the level of animals. So when the Quran talks about نشر الدواب عند الله, the worst, or those who are worse than animals, right? This is an example of that, because you're supposed to be a lofty human being. You have that nafs is, in the end, remember, it is really a part of the spirit. It's part of the ruh, right? The ruh which, when God put into Adam, all the angels prostrated to him. Okay, and instead it's sort of forgotten that side of itself, right? That nafs has forgotten that side of itself, and it's just become focused on this lower bodily existence. Okay, and shaitan runs with it. Okay, so the simplistic animal passions are there, but now they're also sort of demonic and cruel tendencies too. Okay, to gain one's desires by deception and falsehood and conniving and cunning, and at the injury and expense of others. Okay, to desires to lord over others as well start to come in, right? To be idolized, to be worshipped, to be followed. Okay, this all enters, right? And that's part of the inciting nafs. Okay, so this is nafs which doesn't recognize a Lord. It doesn't recognize a Lord at all, right? And it's completely ignorant of itself. So again, it's the human being who is in this sort of state is completely ignorant of what he is. The human being is supposed to be a lofty creature, right? The nafs of this person has no inkling of the ruh side, right? It's only just focused on that aspect which is embedded in the body. Okay, it's unaware that it's just again part of that lofty ruh. Okay, that it has another side, a wondrous side. So we've been calling this connecting part of the ruh to the body nafs, right? But it also has another name, which is the heart, right? So when the Quran talks about the heart or the qalb, okay, that's another way of talking about it, right? And when we talk about hearts which are diseased, okay, it's we're talking about a disease like the nafs, right? So the heart and the nafs are really sort of the same thing. Okay, the heart and the nafs are sort of the same thing. They're sort of like two sides of the same coin, right? Yet by means of of true religious guidance, which is contained at the heart, which contains at the heart of it the spiritual journey. This nafs, this heart, it can be purified. It can be purified from all of these ills, right? And as it as it is purified, it realizes more and more what it truly is. Okay, and as it knows itself more and more and more, it comes to know its Lord more and more and more. Okay, it becomes like a clear mirror in which it can see itself and know itself. Right, and because of that, again, it will come to know its Lord and fully submit to Him. Right. So that's in a sense the journey, right? The spiritual journey. When people talk about it, it's a journey of change, right? The spiritual journey then is one of change. It's one of purification. It's one of elevation away from the body and towards the spirit, right? It's one of becoming lighter due to closeness to spirit, to ruh, rather than becoming heavier and denser due to closeness to physicality. Okay. It's one of turning away from the lower, from the dunya, worldly things, to the higher, loftier, everlasting things. Okay, it's one of leaving darknesses towards light. The Quran talks about it in that kind of way, right? يخرجهم من الظلمات إلى النور. He takes them out of darkness to light. One of becoming oneself more filled with light. Okay, due to having more praiseworthy inequalities, right, rather than being filled with darkness. Okay, due to negative inequalities, right. That's the sort of the spiritual journey, and the journey is unique for each individual, but also it's sort of not. Okay, there are sort of general stages that are kind of recognized, stages where different qualities in the nafs seem to predominate. Okay, and so they are given names, and again, we're talking here about sort of Islamic spirituality and journeying. Okay, those names are taken from the Quran, and it's mostly from different surahs in different places. But you've got 7, right? The Quran sort of mentions 7. Well, not 7. Really mentions 6, right? The 7th is sort of like the final reintegration of the complete soul, right? Where the nafs recognizes itself as ruh completely, and but still interacts with the body. Okay, but anyway, there you've got 7, right? So you've got what's called as you said, the nafs which incites to evil, and nafs al-ammara bisu, and then the higher nafs, or transformation into the reproachful nafs, nafs al-lawama, which is the nafs which blames itself, right? It blames itself constantly, and it also still blames others, right? So sometimes people mention this as being only blaming itself. No, sometimes it still has this tendency to blame others rather than itself, right? But it also blames itself. The nafs which is reproachful, right? Then you get the nafs al-mulhima, the inspired nafs, which is where a degree of purity is reached, where internally you start to feel a lot more inspiration, right? And this stage is qualified by a lot of spiritual highs and spiritual lows, right? There's a lot of changes in that, right? A lot of times where you feel incredibly close to Allah, to God, where you see, it's as if you see Him in every blade of grass, in every raindrop, right? And there are other times where you feel completely distant, completely disconnected, right? And lethargic. You don't want to do any worship or anything like that. Okay, and these two things oscillate a lot during this time. Okay, until finally it enters a state which is serene, where this sort of like this disturbance stops, right? And that's what's called mutma'inna, right? The nafs which has become sort of settled, right? Mutma'inna means sort of like calm, right? Like the waters, right, which are just calm. Okay, and then you have the nafs which is contented, right? Contented, radiya, right? Radiya. So it's completely contented with everything, right? Completely happy. It wouldn't change anything about itself. It's very happy. And then there's a nafs al-mardiya, right? Nafs al-mardiya, which is basically means it's pleasing. Everybody will be pleased by this nafs, right? It's pleasing to Allah and it's pleasing to the good of His creation, right? And finally, you have al-nafs al-kamila, okay, the complete or the whole nafs, right? So that's sort of like the how they're divided into stages, right? So the journey is to move, basically. It's a movement and to transform from one nafs to the next higher nafs, which is more lofty, which is less dense, right? Which is purer, which is more subtle, and which is more aware of both itself and the real. Okay, it's more aware of what it is and what reality is. Okay. So how does this work? I mean, there's a lot of you'll be able to find if you want manuals online, you know, of Sufi practices and things about how do you do this, right? How do you go if your nafs is stuck in this stage of being very, you know, difficult in terms of always trying to incite you towards anger, to be arrogant, to, you know, bad character. What do you do, right? How do you move from one to the other to the other to the other? So there's a number of things. One of the first things, especially in the lowest level, where the nafs is inciting to evil, is what we call animosity. Right? That you have to take that nafs which is inciting you to evil. You have to treat it as an enemy, because it is an enemy. And in that sort of state, right? If you find your nafs is constantly inciting you to evil, then it's like your enemy, right? You have to sort of be the enemy of your nafs, of yourself. Okay, so it's important that you have to be able to counter it, right? To wipe away the negative qualities you've come to recognize in it by imposing upon it the opposite, right? So what does that mean practically? Well, it means that when it incites you to act in jahl, right, you force it to act with forbearance, of hilm, right? So if you're in a situation where, you know, you're internally, it's pushing you to act in this sort of like vulgar, aggressive, barbaric kind of way, right? To be the person who sort of gets one over the other, and, you know, to be a jahil, to act in jahl, right? Then you force it to be forbearing. You force yourself to not act that way. You rein it in. You know, إنما الحلم بالتحلم وإنما العلم بالتعلم, right? That forbearance is achieved by imposing it on yourself, right? Until it becomes part of yourself, right? Like again, that saying, it's circular but true. You become what you do, right? So you force it to be forbearing, right? You keep your mouth shut, right? In those situations where you want to, you know, jump up and no. You have to be an enemy of that aspect. Okay, when it's anger is pricked, if your nafs is constantly being, you know, you explode in anger at people and you get angry for no reason and you start to, you know, no, if that happens, then you have to force yourself to swallow that anger. Yeah, you have to force yourself to be calm, and you keep doing that again and again and again. And as each time you do that, you're beating that out of your nafs, right? You're acquiring the opposite, right? By forcing the opposite on it, it's wiping away that sort of thing. Okay, so you force yourself to swallow your anger and to be calm. Okay, when it pricks you to boast, right, and be prideful upon others, right? When you want to say something which is sort of like, yeah, look what I did. Look, no, you force yourself to be silent, right? And to have humility, right? When it pushes you to lust, you deny it, right? You say no. You have, you know, that taqwa of pulling back away from it, okay, and force austerity. When it tells you to be miserly, right, to not give, no, you force yourself to give and to give generously, right? If it sees itself as arrogant and arrogance as being better than this person or that person, then you put yourself with that person, right? You put yourself among them or with them, or in that position, right, where you're countering yourself. If that's clear, right? So it's a very important aspect, right? That you have to fight those darker tendencies until they are replaced with lighter ones. Okay, so that's one thing. There's also what's called the 4 pillars of spiritual transformation, right? And they're important because they make everything else easier, right? So what are they? Wakefulness. So you reduce the amount of time you sleep. Okay. Of course, that doesn't mean to dangerous levels, but what it means is that you don't, because a spiritual person is awake, right? It's not a person who's sleeping, right? It's not a sleep-filled person, right? A spiritual person, there's a lot of ghafla, what's called forgetfulness, right? In being in this sort of like lower world, right? And the sleep part of it, right? It just increases that. You just become sort of withdrawn from this world, but not in the right way. Whereas the wakefulness, being awake, right, and being awake with dhikr, right, and with this awareness, okay, you're becoming more awake, right? When we say somebody's awakened, right, in that sort of enlightened way, right, that's a similar sort of idea. By not sleeping so much, you are not dragging that nafs to be sort of like more into the body. Don't know if that makes sense or not. The other thing is silence. Okay, so less talk, right? Less talk. Why? Because the more you have silence, the more you can sort of listen to your inner self a bit more, listen to your heart a bit more, but also reduces a lot of the sins, right? So a lot of the evils of the nafs, right? There will be things from the tongue, right? That are, and by not silence here means speaking less, basically, right? Even like wakefulness means sleeping less, not completely not sleeping, and silence means just not always to just let your tongue just rattle off, right? But to try to listen more, right? To be more quiet and listen more. Seclusion as well. Why? Because again, mixing. Most people are not going to be trying to be on this kind of spiritual quest, right? And so just mixing with people sort of distracts you, pulls you away from that. There's you get pulled into different sins of backbiting and hearing people being backbited and this and that, and then argumentation. There's just so many things which come through interacting with especially the wrong sort of people, right? So more seclusion, okay, and also in more alone time. When you have more alone time, you're not really alone, are you? You're in the presence of your Lord, right? So when you spend more time in seclusion, you start to see that realization more and more that Allah is with you wherever you are, right? And the last one, hunger. And hunger is it's said to be the most important one. You can see that in how every spiritual discipline in the world, or religious or religion where you have a spiritual discipline, they're going to use hunger, right? Fasting and these sort of things. Why? Well, again, it loosens that hold, right, of the nafs in the body, right? That gets loosened a bit, right? You're less. Again, it goes all the way back to what we were talking about, how the nafs, the very first thing that it's attached to, the very first desire that it gets attached to, is that of food, right? Of hunger, little kids and sweets and these sort of things, right? So one of the ways to pull that away is through hunger, okay? Deliberate hunger, right? Not where you yourself are reducing the amount of food you eat. Again, it doesn't mean, some people think of this as it means fasting. It doesn't mean fasting, and it doesn't mean fasting and then stuffing your face at the time for eating. It means trying to reduce the amount of food, right? And spend a bit. Hunger can actually it might seem strange, but hunger can taste nice, right? You start to see more of the spiritual side of yourself as you reduce the sensual side, right? And among those is eating a lot, right? To always be eating too much, right? Have set meal times, right? And that's it. No snacking in between. None of always sticking things in your mouth. No, right? You want to reduce that. Okay. So that's what it does. It loosens the hold of the body on the nafs, right? It whitens the heart. It promotes humility. When you're hungry, you're a little bit more humble, right? A little bit more calm, right? Conversely, also, to be honest, though, in hunger, sometimes it can make your nafs lash out, okay? And so that's sort of like you're bringing out some of you start to understand what's really in your nafs, right? Which problems you might have, because sometimes they come out when you're hungry, right? And so you know now what to fight, going back to that first thing of fighting against your nafs, right? And again, when you're hungry, you don't talk as much, right? Which it goes back to the one about silence, right? And you sleep less, right? So that's why many would consider hunger to be the most important one. But by far the most important practice when it comes to this sort of like trying to transform your nafs from one level to the other, and so they will submit to God, is abundant remembrance of Allah, abundant remembrance of God, right? By which is meant abundant repetition of phrases of dhikr and divine names consciously and with energy and with focus, okay? And to be done, morning and evening and in part of the night, right? That is what anybody who has trekked the path of trying to go on a spiritual journey, they will attest to this, right? The most important thing is dhikr, right? And a verse which is often pointed about that, it says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu udhkurullaha dhikran kathiran. O you who have faith, remember of Allah with much remembrance. Udhkurullaha dhikran kathiran. وَسَبِّحُوهُ بُكْرَةً وَأَصِيلًا. And exalt him, tasbih, right? In the morning and in the evening. Okay, why? What's the next verse saying? هُوَ الَّذِي يُصَلِّي عَلَيْكُمْ وَمَلَائِكَتُهُ لِيُخْرِجَكُمْ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ وَكَانَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَحِيمًا. For he is the one who confers blessings upon you. يُصَلِّي عَلَيْكُمْ. And, Allah, is said about salah, right? Even somebody in the beginning of the stream was talking about, the whole idea of is salah ritual or not, right? When it comes to salah, in the end, it means sort of like a prayer or blessing or these sort of things. And in terms of linguistically, it means linking, right? So you could think of this as also saying that he's the one who will link with you, right? That God himself will link with you. Now that's mentioned in a different verse, with Qur'ani azkurkum. Remember me, I will remember you, right? And you have to understand that again, because we are spiritual beings, right? And the idea of remembering somebody or anyone, right? Even everybody knows this sort of like phenomenon that happens when you sort of think of somebody and then they call you, right? Or you call somebody, or you're speaking about somebody and then they turn up. Or you call somebody and they're like, wow, I was just literally just going to call you now, right? The whole thing what's called sometimes telephone telepathy, right? Because in remembering each other, even us humans, when we remember somebody, our remembering them can have our spirit reach out to the person in a way that they then remember us, okay? It creates a link. Right? Salah is again linking in many ways, right? So Allah says, "Adhkuruni adhkurkum." Remember me, I will remember you. Okay. So whenever you're engaged in dhikr, right? Whenever you're engaged in this kind of focused meditation and dhikr of Allah, at that moment, Allah is remembering you, right? What does that mean, remembering you? Allah doesn't forget you. It means it's sort of mentioning you, focused on you, sort of his eyes upon you, right? وَالَّذِي يُصَلِّي عَلَيْكُمْ وَمَلَائِكَتَهُ, and even the angels are involved, right? So you have angels involved when you're somebody who is a person of a lot of dhikr. Allah is blessing you and His angels. Okay, why? He's drawing you out from the darknesses, to draw you out, to take you out from the darknesses. Which the darknesses of yourself, right? Of your nafs. مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ, okay, to the light. وَكَانَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ رَحِيمًا, and He is to the faithful most merciful. All right. Okay. So that's basically. I mean, there's a lot more I was going to say. I mean, maybe I'll leave a couple of these things and these slides. These were just things I wrote, and I was going to put them into other slides and continue, but we'll end there. There's a book which I could recommend, which talks a lot about this sort of stuff. It's called The Degrees of the Soul, or in Arabic, if you can find it in Arabic, if you can read Arabic, it's called Maratib al-Nafs. But this is a good translation. I mean, I read it a long time ago. The Arabic is I mean, it's a very good translation with respect to the Arabic. So I'd highly recommend it. I mean, this goes through sort of in more detail, going through each of the nafs and what you can expect at each stage, and what are the things you do to try to go beyond it, etc. Right? So I'd highly recommend that book. If anybody else was if you're interested in the whole idea of spiritual journeying, right? So that's about it. That was a very, let's see, how long was that? Damn, 1 hour. Wow. Okay. Well, that's the end of the stream. I thought, again, I wasn't sure how I would, how this would fare. Going through a topic like that is very difficult, but I hope I did a decent enough job for things that you might not hear as much elsewhere. Anything else? I mean, like I said, if anybody's interested, if you get this book, explains a lot of things in there as well, very similar to from what I remember, right? Because I haven't read it in a very long time. All right, okay. So that's about it. Anybody who would like to come on, please, let me put the link again, because I don't know if it's still if it's pinned or not. There was actually I remember now, there was somebody who wanted to come on and speak, somebody from Reddit. It was a lady, I think her name was, her username was Lone or something. She had a bunch of questions, I think, about issues of struggling faith, about the Prophet and his treatment of women or things like this. Assalamu alaikum, Zaliyab. I hope you're well. All right, let me go through some of these chats. Very good, brother. I really needed you to confirm some of my suspicions. I'm really sad how fast was easy for me, and now I simply break for no reason. Like I lose all control over my nafs. Yeah. I mean, it is a fight, right? And it gets easier. I mean, like anything, like we said, there's those levels of the nafs. The first stage is is difficult, but if really sort of like bite down and get through it, it does become much easier. These things, they lose hold of you with each battle, right? With each battle that you win, it loses hold of you more and more. Alaikum assalam, perfect da'wah, good to see you. And assalamu alaikum, our brother Zen Islam. Let me see, there was some other things. Caffeine crashes you, it makes you sleep tired, yeah. How do you recommend dealing with the frustrations of so many internet Muslims misrepresenting Islam, with offensive jihad and child marriage and other corruptions? How would I recommend? I mean, I used to, used to these things sort of used to make me sad, and I think, okay, what can somebody do? And you sort of feel sorry for those who are who think that way, or who misguide others with it. But I suppose it's not. Now I don't. It's going to sound a bit weird, but I don't really feel sad or sorry for anything that's happened, because I start to see that in the end, Allah is going to be extremely just and more merciful with these people than I ever could, right? That He knows, the situations and the background issues and stuff like that. I mean, why would I be worried? I mean, it's sort of like something, to be honest. Here we're talking about spiritual journey and stuff, but it's something that I'm trying to go beyond, right? This lack of fear for others going to hell, sort of, right? That sort of like disappeared from me. I don't worry about anybody going to hell, not because I don't think people will, right? But because it's sort of like, in my sort of like mentality now, it almost seems like I'm worried that God will be unjust to them, right? If you get my meaning. So like being worried or sad, or that these people are misguided or stuff like that. What am I worried or sad or anxious about for them? Why? When in my mind, sort of thinking that way is almost like I'm worried that God is going to not be just with them, and that's sort of like I need to save them from God, right? So but that's not the right way. Well, maybe it is the right way at part of the journey, but ultimately, right, the messengers, they were afraid for their people. إِنِّي أَخَافُ عَلَيْكُمْ عَذَابَ يَوْمٍ أَلِيمٍ, right? I fear for you the torment of a bad day. I fear for you, for your people. And the Prophet, the Quran mentions him as being, almost consuming himself with grief that they would not have faith, right? So that's obviously the higher level, right? Where you don't, you're not worried that God is going to be unjust to them, but at the same time, you're still worried for them. For me at the moment, I'm just not worried for anybody. That's probably not where I should be. But that's how I've been sort of for a few years now, I suppose. And maybe that reflects sometimes, I get into different sort of debates on Reddit and different places about salvation, these sort of things. Maybe part of that is just a reflection of, my own state at the moment, because I don't know where it went, but I really don't worry about people going to hell and be scared for them or anything like that. I don't know if that answers this question or not. Because generally I don't try to deal with these things. I mean, I answer any questions and stuff that come my way. But in the end, I'm fully trust Allah to treat people more fairly and with more mercy than I ever would, right? I would treat them probably worse, right? I would definitely treat them worse than Allah would. Let me go back down to the bottom. There's nobody backstage, by the way. It makes dawah extremely difficult when we get Islamophobes, polemics all the time, and there's Iraqi clerics and brigades of headstrong online Muslims saying, yeah, it does. It does make it difficult. But again, on the individual level of those people who are being drawn into that and accepting that, for me, it's not like I would say I would look at them and I think, okay, yes, you've been sort of duped by these jihadists or these mullahs or these things, how do they react to them is an interesting thing, right? So those who who are accepting of what they say, and those who are sort of like rejecting of what they say and just are put off from Islam because of that. Those reactions, you got to look at them in sort of a way where it's almost positive, right? And the people who are being put off by Islam because they are being convinced by these guys that of these extremist things, then that's actually a very good thing for those other people, right? Those people who are being put off by from Islam because of what they've been taught about injustices in Islam, right? So I see that in the way which is almost positive. Assalamu alaikum, prayers. Hope you're doing well. Some people are of the opinion the slavery mentioned in the Quran was actually an employment in that era. Is that an assessment according to based on Quran and on study? No, I don't think that's true. I mean, there was definitely slavery among the Arabs before Islam, right? Before the Quran. So that's how I see it. That all the slavery, because the Quran mentions, what does it mean? It really mentions. It doesn't even say slavery, right? I mean, it talks about Malikat Yaminuk, right? I know some people say that doesn't include slaves, but I think it obviously does. I mean, one of the verses says, قُلْ لِمَنْ فِي أَيْدِيكُمْ مِنَ الْأَسْرَى, right? So captives are among Malikat Aymanukum, and so are slaves. But the point is that these were pre-Islamic slaves, right? The slaves, they were already there before Islam, right? So if you're somebody in Medina, you have 4 slaves, and the Prophet comes to Medina and you become a Muslim, right? You still have those slaves, right? You still have those slaves. Now you might free them, right, because of the guidance that you see in the Quran and the exhortation to free slaves and all that, right? Or you might say, no, look, I bought those 4 slaves for however much, right, money, and I need them to work on this field because Medina, they had a lot of crops and stuff, and if I just free them all, who's going to work my fields, right? So that's why the slaves were not just like unilaterally freed. Okay, that couldn't be done. It could only be done later, towards the end of the Prophet's mission, when Surah 9 was being revealed, when the Prophet actually instituted some taxes, right? So once there was some taxes, right, part of that revenue was going towards freeing slaves, and it wasn't optional, right? So every slave also could get a contract made to buy their own freedom. Okay, so that would be it's something which people had to do. If a slave wanted to buy their freedom, then you have to write up a contract by how much he can be bought and freed for. And once that's done, he's freed. So once the Muslims had the Prophet instituted taxes, part of those taxes were to go for riqab, right, for the freeing of slaves. So there was definitely slavery at the time, right? Let me add, who do you have here? Islam submission. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Hey,
hello,
how are you
brother
doing?
I'm good. Thank all praises be to Allah. How about you, brother?
I'm good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I just joined, and so is this a book you authored that I see?
No, it's not mine at all. No, it's what I was basically going through some slides about spiritual wayfaring and the journeying, sort of like the Sufi path and journey, and that sort of idea. And this is just a book recommendation, right, which goes through into a lot more detail. But that's called Degrees of the Soul by Abdul Khaliq al-Shabrawi. So it's just a recommendation, not my book at all.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yes, that sounds interesting. I might check it out if Allah wills. Yes, it sounds like a nice book.
Yeah, it's very short as well, by the way. I didn't mention that. It's actually quite short and very to the point. And the thing that I used to like about it, I read it years and years ago, but it gets straight to the point, and it goes through sort of like each of the degrees of the soul, which I mentioned, right? The 7 stages of sort of like the spiritual path, and of changing yourself from the lower sort of base self, which is called in the Quran Nafs al-Ammara bisu, the self which incites or adamantly incites to evil, all the way up towards sort of the soul which is completely at peace and is pleasing to Allah.
Beautiful. Yes. Yeah, that sounds really good. Because when it comes to the soul, the self, yes, it has. Many people would say that, you know, that our souls cannot be trusted sometimes when they make us, incite us to do evil. But at the same
Yeah,
time, we have the pure nature, which means that our souls are also tuned with doing good deeds.
yeah,
So, yes, many people would say that, yes, the soul is basically an instrument that is in every single one of us, and it can be it, the believers would incite it to do good, right? Yes, so yes, that's
yeah.
really good. And for yes, I had a few questions, brother, about one of them is about music, because there's I believe that the mainstream position in among many scholars is that, but I believe that you have made a video about it, if I'm not mistaken. Did you?
No, no. Oh, well, I made. I mean, you'll see one thumbnail where there's like a
Yes, a
piano
piano.
keyboard. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
It isn't really. It isn't really about that. It's about one verse which is taken often to mean as if it's talking about music being
Yeah,
haram, right? Lahu al-hadith. But
exactly.
it's really. But the stream is mostly about that phrase and what it means. Not about. I don't remember. I probably did. I must have spoken about music in that stream as well. Um, but yeah, I mean the idea about music and the issue with music, like you said, the traditional idea is that it's all haram, right? Well, some of the traditional ideas, right? And there's a weird split that like wind instruments are haram. For some scholars will tell you that the wind instruments and the string instruments are haram, but the drum instruments are halal. Right? So you have that weird one there. When it comes to music, all music is allowed. The issue of music is that it can become haram or depending on what's being put inside it. So if you're listening to music which is promoting haram, then of course that's going to be haram, right? Because in the sam'a wal basar wal fu'ad kullu ulaika kana anhu mas'ula. The Quran says your hearing, your eyesight, your heart, you're responsible for all of that. You're going to be questioned for how you used all of that, right? Um, but a lot of it. I mean, I'd be careful with music because sometimes I mean it can get addictive, right? I mean these tunes and stuff are made in such a way that they really seep deep into you, and then you find yourself just singing them and repeating them at different times, and sort of they start to crowd away your thoughts. And one of the dangers I think of a lot of music is that you start the music pours into you the emotions of the musician, right? And there are people that are addicted to music because of this, the emotions that they keep getting from them, right? So they listen to music so they can feel this way, so they can cry, so they can. So it's basically it's engineering their emotions, right? And so I don't think that's healthy. That stops you from having your own thoughts and your own emotions, right? Because you're really absorbing a lot of what somebody else is putting into you, right? And that's what I think. I mean, there are people that spend so much time listening to music, they don't realize that what they're doing that there's a sort of addiction to the feelings that the music give them, right? And that stops you from having your own feelings a lot of the time, right? It takes away, the normal ebb and flow of the emotions during the day. Okay, so that's what I would say about it. You'd have to be careful with music, even good music, right? So sparingly, I would say is the best method. But in terms of haram halal, it's just about what's in it, right? What's in the music? Is it something which is vulgar, right? Is it something which is promoting haram? Is it something which is going to incite you towards this, glorify this, and make some sins seem less, right? Is it going to make fun of God and His Messenger or the signs of God and these sort of things? No, and then you have to stay away from that, right? In the Quran, you have also that إذا تتلى إذا إذا سمعتم آيات الله يستهزئ بها ويكفر بها فلا تقعدوا معهم. That if you hear the signs of Allah and being made fun of, right, then don't sit with that people, right? That if you're in a group of people and they're starting to make fun of the signs of Allah, then just get up and walk away until they talk about something else. حتى يخوضوا في حديث غيره. It doesn't even say that you just cut off from them and never speak to these people again. No, it just says that while they are engaged in that kind of discourse, you go away. Okay. Otherwise, you are like one of them. You are giving sort of like tacit agreement to what they're saying by staying in that gathering. So no, you get up, you go away, right? And when they talk about something else, you can come back and join them, right? So in a similar sort of way, that there's music that you have to just stay away from because that's what it does, right?
Yes, that makes sense, brother. I believe maybe more broadly, I would say that it resembles poetry. Poetry
Yeah.
can also be used in a good way, in a positive way, or it
Mm.
could be used in a negative way. For
Yeah.
example, yes, they were obviously, yes, poetry was more a thing, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But
Mm.
nowadays there's music everywhere, right? In
Yeah,
the
yeah, exactly. I mean,
supermarket, in the
yeah.
elevators. So
Yeah, the poets
it's
have become the music, the musicians, even though
ex-
they don't really say actual poetry anymore, right? Like
exactly,
there's some amazing poetry out there, which really gets you
yes,
to think. Um, but yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly right. That's the typical example that's given, right? That music is like poetry. Poetry can be good or bad. Music can be good or bad depending on what's being said.
exactly. And there were some sheikhs, some priests, right, Muslim scholars who said that, because there's music everywhere, you can only watch the National Geographic, but it does have
Even that
music
has
too.
music, huh?
Yes.
There's
So
the dramatic
yes,
music when the
when
lion is about to hunt, right? What about that?
exactly, because music, it really heightens the emotions, right? And that's why
Yeah,
in almost all movies nowadays there's a music score, right? But
yeah,
in my opinion, these people who say it's just wrong, it's just forbidden, it's just haram, they
mm,
just look at the negative music. For example, they would say that this music incites drugs and fornication. And
yeah,
yes, that's bad music, definitely. I don't want
mm,
to listen to it. And that's why we don't let the young children around such
yeah,
music, because we know that that's going to corrupt, their minds if they
yeah,
listen to such songs, right? But
yeah,
especially it comes to the songs, right? Degrading, for
yeah,
example, human beings. It's mainly about the words, but they
yeah,
say that it's about the musical sounds. Some
yeah,
scholars, they say, because I didn't really, I kind of struggled with the idea, because I mean, I, I, in the past, nowadays I don't really, you know focus so much on this issue, but yes, they used to say that the musical instruments, or yes, like you said, the wind instruments,
Yeah,
the the key, I believe,
yeah,
like yes, like the
yeah.
pianos and musical instruments like that are forbidden, but the drums,
But the
because the
drums are
dove is
fine.
allowed. Yes,
Yeah, the drums and the
exactly,
tambourines, they're okay.
exactly.
It's silly. It's silly. Look at the. Of course, they get that from narrations from hadith, right? And the issue is that when it's basically a euphemism because of the Arabs, they would use those instruments, right? Specifically, those instruments for music, which involved dancing girls, right? So the Arabs would have like dancing girls dance to these sort of the music made by these instruments. So when he was speaking about that, he was really speaking about those sort of things. That's what was happening in those gatherings of that kind of music, right? Because
Mm.
that's what the Arabs had. They didn't really have drums, right? But and then when the Abyssinians came to the Prophet's mosque and did a performance there, and they used the drums. The Prophet watched, and he allowed his wives to watch. So then, based on that, um, these genius scholars said that drums are allowed and stringed instruments are not. Right?
Yes, but it's yes, but you know what really what I find really interesting is that there's a hadith, a narration where I believe it speaks about Prophet David, peace be upon him, Dawood, right?
Yeah.
And it speaks about him, I believe, being gifted with some, I'm not sure, I
Yeah.
believe some woodwind,
Yeah. Yeah.
sounds, right? So
Yeah.
how do they reconcile these? They have to, like you said, they have to say that.
They all say it's a different Sharia. That's the Sharia of thing. Basically, the Hadith also it's really about the recitation of the Quran, about the voice of one of the Sahaba, right? So it's Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. The Prophet said to him, "Recite because you have been given like one of the Mazamir Dawood, right? You've been given one of like the instruments of Dawood, basically saying his voice, right? So that's what it's that is actually what the hadith means, to be honest, right? It's just saying that your voice is as nice as the voice of Dawood, right? So it's just equating the Sahabi's voice with an instrument and saying it's like the instrument of Dawood, right? I mean, even we speak in that kind of way. Like when you talk somebody who has amazing voice, you say what an instrument he has, right? You just mean his voice.
Mm, exactly.
Hmm.
Yes, some people's voices are tuned like instruments, but
Hmm.
even the voice can be used for good or bad. So, yes, I believe that, if music is evil, then one should stay away from it because it's going to impact them in a negative way. But if
Hmm.
music is better, for example, it praises, you know, God and the messengers, like we have actually, right? We have these, what are they called, Islamic poetry, nasheed, right?
Yeah.
So, but many scholars say that it's not allowed with music, even though the whole songs are about worship.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
but they would say not with music, just with, even some scholars say that singing is forbidden. I don't know if you know about
Yeah.
these scholars who say that singing is not permissible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm laughing. I just remembered something that there was like this Arabic call-in show, right, where they call in and ask a scholar something, right? And so there's this I don't know if it was a YouTuber or something, but anyway, my wife showed it to me. Some guy making a basically a funny video about a sheikh when somebody called him and said, "Hey, sheikh, is it allowed for my wife to dance for me?" And the sheikh was like, "Yes, she can dance with you, but without any music." And the guy was like, just making fun of like, "What? If she can't dance, if she can dance for him, but she can't dance with any music. What is she going to dance to then?" I forget the
Yes, I
actual
see.
video, but I remember that video was in Arabic. It was quite funny.
Oh, I see. Yes, because yes, that's the kinds of things they say. Indeed, that
Mm,
no music, just I guess, yes, singing to just the wind, or yes, even
yeah,
that is music, right? The wind, the rain, the everything is music in a way,
yeah.
because
Here would be a nice thing to do, right? Get somebody to make. I think it's been done as well. Music out of natural sounds, right? So get
yes.
different bird songs, and edit it all together to make some elaborate musical piece. What would they say to that? That becomes halal probably, right? So then what you could end up having basically is a database of different sounds, natural sounds, and then use those to basically mimic any pop song, right? To have like sort of the same beat, same rhythm. Won't of course be exactly the same sound, but I bet that could be done, right? And I would probably throw these scholars for a loop. Then ask them, is this halal?
Mhm. Yes, there was I believe it was Dr. Zakir Naik who said that he knew about these, sounds that were made, like natural sounds, like the thunder, the wind, and he said that it's very similar to music, and you're allowed to to listen to this.
Yeah,
Yes. I yes, I guess that settles this issue that music can be good or bad. But yes, there's the word, the amusement of speech, lahwal hadith,
Hmm.
and it's mainly translated as amusement of speech, idle
Yeah,
tale. Yes, and I believe that scholars say that this is music.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it has nothing to do with music, of course.
Hmm. I
Yeah,
see. Yes. Yes.
yeah.
So, of course, there's some good music and some bad music. So yes, we have to sort this out. And
Mm,
I've seen that obviously, people who are extreme like Taliban and these people, they ban music, and yeah, so as you've said, these people, you know, the people who are turned away from Islam use these individuals to try to portray this negative image of what they believe is. But no, Islam is
mm,
beautiful. It's just these extremists that are basically trying to abuse religion by making, you know, all kinds of laws, right?
yeah,
But they're not really, like God says, who are these people to, and I'm paraphrasing, but it goes like this: how can they make unlawful what Allah has made lawful, right?
yeah.
How could the beautiful things, right? So yes, this features as well.
Mm,
And my other question is about marriage. And again, I'm going to speak from the traditional side because that's what I've heard, not
yeah.
because it is necessarily because there obviously, when it comes to scholars, there are so many different interpretations and differences of views, and
Mm,
many people trust scholars. And I trust scholars for many things, but at the same time, sometimes I like to read the Quran on my own because
yeah.
sometimes if something is clearly wrong, categorically forbidden, then of course a scholar can help you. But in my
Mm,
opinion, sometimes, yes, I don't always necessarily, I do my homework as well.
yeah.
So my question is about the marriage, and especially when it comes to celibacy, wanting to
Mm,
remain single. Obviously,
mm,
many scholars have their conditions, and they say that marriage is not necessarily obligatory, but it can
mm,
be if one fears fornication.
mm,
But it is forbidden if somebody cannot basically provide for his spouse, whether it be
mm,
financially or otherwise, because obviously that would be tribulation, fitna, right?
yeah.
Tribulation, and it wouldn't be a good thing. But they say that somebody who's young and able, and if he fears fornication, right,
Mm,
immorality, then they
Yeah.
have to get married. So, what
Yeah.
is your opinion on this, brother, about marriage? And is it a must in a religion, or is it something that people choose? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not a must at all. It's something that you choose. Um, Even the idea that I'll get married to save yourself from fornication. No, I don't think that's right to advise a young person. Hey, if you're fearful of fornication, you should get married. I think that's very ignorant about marriage, and and its difficulties and what it pertains, and all that kind of stuff. So you tell a person to get married if they are able to get married, and if they want to get married, and if they're mature enough to get married. But to tell somebody to get married just because they fear fornication, I think that can do a lot more damage than than bad, right? I think part of that has got to do with how do you define fornication, right? So they think that any fornication is zina, right? That's how they have it. Um, but Quranically, when it comes to the major sin of zina, what is that? That is when a married woman is involved, right? So when a married woman is involved, that's zina, right? If the woman involved is not married, then it's not zina, right? Um, so when they talk about fornication, um, um, you know, they're talking really about sifah, right? Which isn't the major sin, not like zina. Zina is the major sin. Sifah is not, right? So like an unmarried person with an unmarried person, that is not zina, right? Um, so maybe that's got to do with how they divide it. But again, I don't think that somebody getting married just to save themselves from sifarah, from this kind of like fornication, is a good advice to give, right? I think it would create a lot more trouble than there is, because you're advising somebody who's the person himself doesn't seem mature enough, right? If somebody is saying, I need to get married because I'm fearful of zina, um, this person could actually do zina even when they're married, right? A person like that, um, they could end up doing more damage um, in a marriage, right? And what's the blame of the girl or the guy who this person wants to get married to, who the other person would probably want to get married in order to start a family, to have to actually have a mature relationship and raise a family and kids and all of that. And this other person is just getting married because they're so horny, basically, right? So I think it's a very bad way to advise people. So that's what I would say about that. But in terms of like, is it obligatory? No, it's not obligatory, right? Even if you like fear zina, right? It's not obligatory to get married. What's obligatory is for you to find ways to stop yourself from committing zina.
Mm. Yes,
Yeah,
of course. Yes,
yeah.
thank you
That,
for
that
your
doesn't have to
insight.
involve you getting um, getting married to somebody else, who isn't marrying you just to save you from zina, right? The other person who you say, I want to get married to save myself from zina. Well, the other person doesn't want to. I doubt the other person wants to marry you just to be able to save you from zina, right? So I
Mm.
think it's almost an injustice against the other person you're marrying if you're going into a marriage with that kind of mentality.
Yes, because these scholars they have put these conditions, and yes, when you think about it, in the long term, right? How is it gonna work out? Because marriage is much more than just some. Obviously, there's family unit that is being built. There's love. There's commitment. There's so many things. So
Mm.
it is. If the desire is there, it has to be controlled, right? And that's
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
is true.
somebody is fearful of zina, gets married. Okay, after 6 months, he's not fearful of zina anymore, right? And what does he do? Well, I didn't want to be married really. I just wanted, to save myself from zina. Well, I've done that now, so you know, divorce. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's just a dangerous thing to advise people.
Right. Yes, because even after that, I mean, may Allah protect us all, but sometimes some people would can even fall into what is it, adultery, because after they've done it, they they basically, if this is they were just too, how could I say, yes, too horny, if we put it, this way, that they had to have a companion, but then
Mm,
after that they they find somebody more, obviously they have to control themselves. That's the whole point, to lower the gaze. God tells us to
yeah,
lower the gaze. So, but let's say that this is all about, looks, then, he can fall into some major sins afterwards, which would be even
yeah,
worse if you think
yeah,
about it,
exactly. I
because
mean, yeah,
adultery is much worse than fornication, even,
yeah,
yes, as you
yeah,
as you
yeah,
mentioned. But even, what is it, being unjust to your spouse, it's also a major sin, I believe, because many
mm,
scholars, they don't think about these things, but they tell many people, these youths who are, with all due respect, not very mature indeed, to
mm,
go and get married, and they don't know the first thing about how to raise a family,
yeah,
with all due respect to them, but they haven't had proper teaching about
mm,
these sorts of things, this field of
yeah,
caring for your children, taking care of finances and all these
yeah,
things, right? And how to handle,
mm,
everything, and have live in a prosperous house. So, yes, brother,
yeah.
what do you think about this whole injustice in marriage? It's a very bad
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, it is. It is. No, I agree. Um, yeah, I mean, look, the idea of just advising somebody, get married so you can save yourself from zina, I think it's a shallow way of advising somebody. It doesn't mean that the person shouldn't, right? I don't think it's necessarily like a how do I put it? Like it's if like it's just not a mature reason to marry. It's not a mature reason to marry, right? And somebody who's getting married for that reason is just going to, he's not going to choose a spouse based on, good, um, sort of like good ideas. Choose a spouse based on lust mostly, right? Um, but at the same time, maybe if there's, if the person has family around them to advise them, and if they can get their family involved and these sort of things, remember that in marriage there's a lot of family involvement, right? So some young person comes to a sheikh, says, "Hey, I'm scared of zina." The sheikh says, "Okay, go and you should get married. It's obligatory upon you to get married." And the kid goes away and tells his parents, "Hey, the sheikh told me it's obligatory for me to get me married." And then the parents are involved and they try and find a suitable wife, somebody who's going to thing and advising on marriage, and it can work that way, right? I'm just saying at that kind of just shallow level of just somebody, some sheikh just advising somebody, hey, all people or shiur given this blanket statement for young people, telling them, hey, if you're afraid of zina, you have to get married. It's more needs to be discussed than that, right? Much more needs to be discussed um, than that. That's just not a very wise thing to just be putting out. I don't think.
Mm. Yes, exactly. Because speaking to you about it is, it, it it really puts things into perspective, because that would scare me if I were to
Mm.
ask, my sheikh, my scholar, my priest, to
Yeah,
basically some advice, and he would tell me just go get married, because I don't feel, that this would basically come as a shock, because this is such a big thing, and yet they it's like they just shrug it off, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Oh, you're afraid of you want to protect yourself. Of course you have to protect yourself, but they just throw it like that. Get
yeah,
married.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, speaking about marriage, what would be the Islamic procedure? Because these scholars, obviously, they have, I'm going to list their conditions again because that's what you know,
Yeah.
I've been I've been knowing about a little
Yeah.
bit. I'm going to talk about the traditional view is that dating is
Yeah.
forbidden, and
Hmm.
basically the man has to either, it has to ask the scholars at his mosque and family members, or he has
Hmm.
to go knock at doors and
Hmm.
basically propose to the 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 daughter's father, and basically
Hmm.
say, do you have a daughter you want to get married? And I have these qualities. I have. So, what do you think, brother, about this
You're
procedure?
talking about
What is the
that
right
kind of
way?
procedure. Well, there isn't a procedure, right, given in the Quran. So there's no procedure for that. Um, when it comes to these kind of social things, especially in marriage, right? A lot of it is done by what's customary, what's ma'ruf, right? So it's what is culturally known as unacceptable. That is basically acceptable, right? For the most part, okay. When it comes to the procedure and what because the society has to view the couple as married, right? Um, it's a social thing. It's a social um, um, unit, right? Marriage. That the society has to be able to view these two people. Okay, they're married. So whatever the society sees is necessary for them to be considered married, that's how it is for them to be considered married. But in terms of the courtship, right, the whole courtship about how to find a wife and stuff like that, no, the Quran doesn't mention anything about what to do there, right? You don't have to. It just says one thing really, which is more of an illusion. It says that come to the doors from the front end. Don't go to the homes through the back end. So meaning, do things above board, right? Do things in the open. Don't do things like in a sneaky way, right? Going through the back door of the home. Come to the front door, like sort of like what you were saying. Knock on the front door. Uh, but the courtship rituals of different Muslim cultures are different, right? So in some places they will do um, um, sort of like it's the parents who are going to help find um, the husband or the wife, right? And then they get the two together with the family, and big meeting, and they talk, and then they decide, right? So some places do it like that. Other places do it a bit differently. I mean, I don't know all of the cultural practices there, but in terms of, like I said, the courtship, right? Um, the key thing is um, to not, open the door for fornication and zina and these sort of things, right? Um, but in terms of like procedures of how to go about the courtship, of course, there's nothing in the Quran for that, right? The Quran, Allah doesn't micromanage us like that, right? We're not being micromanaged and said, like the way you're mentioning that those sheikhs are saying, do this and this and this. No, right? We're not being micromanaged by that. That kind of micromanaging is what these sheikh like to do.
I see. Yes. And speaking of which, yes, that makes sense because, you know, there are different, you know, obviously, yes, we should protect ourselves from fornication, but yes, they give all these conditions. But yes, I hear you, brother. And I have the question about the partition, the hijab, the covering.
Hmm.
Now, these scholars, they say that there's a difference of opinion. Once again, some
Mm.
scholars are of the view that, you know, the everything must be covered, right? It has to
Yeah.
be. So that's one side. And the others say that, there's only the face can be seen. And obviously, we have in between some other scholars who say that obviously they have, like Dr. Shabar Ali, who I really
Mm.
like, and
Mm.
he gives very nuanced answers about these
Mm.
topics. And he says that modesty is key. It's so because you have some women who wear a lot of makeup with the how do you call it, the head covering, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
basically, yes, because hijab means, I believe it means protection, it means covering. I
Yeah.
believe it's much deeper. Yes,
Mm.
so I believe you have made a video about it, if I'm not mistaken.
No,
So,
I have a couple of Reddit posts about the issue, um, about the head covering and the khimar and these sort of things, but I haven't actually done any video about that. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to the head covering, of course, it's not in the Quran. Um, it's, the idea that you have to cover your hair, or that you cover everything except the hands and the face. That's not in the Quran. In the Quran, you have basically one thing, which is a general command to dress modestly, so that you are known as modest women. Okay, so you have that general command. That can look a little bit different depending again on different cultures, right? In different areas of the world, it might look a little bit different, right? Um, and the other thing that it mentions, the verse of Khimar, right? It's really saying, because the what's clear is that the women at that time used to leave their cleavages exposed, right? So you're able to see the bust line, the cleavage, right? And so that verse is saying, just take the Khimar, right, and cover the jiyub, the bust line, the cleavage, right? So that was it. Okay. So what's being mentioned here is, which is a part of just normal modesty, right? I mean, it didn't even if put it this way, if the all of the women had followed the idea of being modest in the earlier verses, you wouldn't have had this verse about the khimar, right? You wouldn't have had it in there. You only had that because there were some women who continued to do that, continued to leave their cleavages exposed, right? And so you had this verse which is saying, let them cover their cleavages with their khimar, right? Um, and that's it, right? So it's a very sparse, right? These sort of things. I mean, there's very little which talks about women's dress in the Quran. It's just really just a general command for modesty, right? There's no command that you have to cover the hair, or that you have to wear a khimar. You don't even have to wear a khimar. The issue in the verse of the khimar is that the cleavages must be covered, right? Which is again just a part of modesty. That's it. There's
mm,
really not much more to say about it.
I see. Yes, exactly. It's what I've seen is that it's about, covering. I believe that the verse is referring, yes, like you mentioned, the covering of what what needs to be covered is mainly the cleavage, as you mentioned. Yes, so yes, I know you know the Arabic language, and you you have looked at these verses, and yes,
Mm.
there are traditions too. So yes, I'm not
Yeah.
qualified to speak about this, but yes, your explanation, your breakdown makes perfect sense. Yes.
Yeah, I
And
mean, because look, I mean, what is the verse says, قل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن. Right, so that section here, وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن. Right, that's the part which is often taken to mean you have to wear the headscarf. Right, The reason why it's taken, you have to wear the headscarf, is because it mentions let them take the khimars. What is a khimar? So I don't know if you've ever seen these period Arabic shows where they have these Arabic women who have khimar on. What was a khimar? Khimar is basically just something covering their hair, right? It was covering the hair all the way down, sort of like towards the back, right? Sort of like, I don't know how to describe it. Sort of like how you probably see some pictures of it in places where, you know, like sort of like you'd have these pictures of Bedouin women, right, which have this sort of like this cloth over their head and down, right, and it's mainly why is it there? It's to protect their hair from the sun and from the dust and from, you know, it's a desert environment, it's hot, right? So they wear these khimars, right? Both men and women in Arabia used to cover their heads, right, because of the sun and stuff like that. So this khimar is what was on hand, what women had on hand that could be used to cover their cleavage, right? So they were being told, let them, you know, take their khimars and cover their cleavage. Now, because what the traditionals are saying, because well, khimar is a head covering. So this verse is you have to have a head covering which covers the hair in order to act upon this verse. But what this verse is saying is to cover the cleavage, right, with the khimar, right? Now that could even be done by taking the khimar off your head completely and covering the cleavage, right? That's what you could read the verse in that kind of way. In fact, that's basically what it says, right? So if your khimar is not long enough to cover your hair and cover your cleavage, what do you cover? You cover the cleavage, right? You take it off your head, off your hair, and you cover the cleavage, because the verse is saying, وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُورِهِنَّ عَلَى جِيُوبِهِنَّ. Let them take, you know, strike their khimars onto their cleavages, right? So if there was a lady at that time whose khimar was short, right, they weren't all the same size, it was just covering only part of the hair, right, or, you know, most of the hair, let's say all of the hair, but just only went down to the neck or something, or just below, right, and that khimar is not going to reach to cover the cleavage. How does that woman follow this verse? Well, she has to take it off. She will actually have to take off the khimar from her head, from her hair, and use it to cover her cleavage, right? So the goal of the verse was to cover the cleavage, right, with whatever was there. If the women didn't have khimars, if they had hats, right, maybe the verse would have said, use your hats, right? If they had something else, if they didn't have any khimars at all, then maybe the verse would have said, let them get something else or to cover their cleavage, or just said, just cover their cleavage. But the khimars were what all the women had. So the verse just said, take the khimars, cover your cleavage.
I see. Yes, thank you. Yes, that I see. Yes, indeed. Because when we read the verse, we can see that, yes, this is what the verse is saying, right? And then obviously, yeah, the scholars and about, I wanted to ask you about, do you accept the narrations, the hadiths? And I believe you do. You said, I believe that you take some of them that, yes, so perhaps I will let you say, yes,
Yeah,
what
I
would
could accept.
be your answer?
About what, sorry?
Yes, about the hadith. Do you accept it? Do you,
Which hadith?
in general, any, like, for
Oh, yeah.
example,
I mean, I
yes.
accept hadiths. I accept hadiths. But of course, you know, just the basic premise of it is, of course, it shouldn't contradict the Quran, right? It shouldn't contradict the Quran or reason. It should be in line with the Quran. And then I'm happy to accept any hadith which is in line with the Quran, right? In terms of is it needed? No, like, so the idea that, you know, of course the traditionalists will say that you need hadith to practice Islam. I would say no, that the Quran by itself is enough. That doesn't mean that hadiths are all hadiths are wrong, or, you know, that there's no sahih hadiths or anything like that. It just means that the Quran on itself, we have to give it its due, The Quran on its own is enough to guide somebody to what's needed of Islam, right? We should not say that the Quran is impotent on its own, right? So the Quran on its own can guide you, right? Can guide you fully. You don't need any hadiths in order to be guided, right? The Quran is not impotent on its own. So that's what I would say. But I accept a lot of hadiths when it comes to, especially Islamic history and these sort of things. There's a lot which I accept. What I'm going to do is put a link to the Reddit post about khimar. So I've put that into the chat. There's two actually. So that's one, and here's the other one. So if you want to sort of read more in depth about what I've said about hijab and stuff like that, it was really, these posts were sort of by request from others, but I've put them in the chat, so you can read them at your leisure.
I see. Thank you very much, brother. And I would have one last question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
the stoning, and because what do you believe about, because the Quran prescribes lashing, and then the scholars, they say that for adultery it is, I believe we touched down upon it last live stream a little bit, but yes, what would you say about stoning for married adulterers?
So even in the hadiths, there's a hadith, I don't know if it's in Bukhari or Muslim, but one of the Sahih hadiths, right, where the Sahabi, the narrators and the Sahaba are discussing about the issue of the stoning, right? So one of them asks the other, "Did the Prophet stone?" Right? And he says yes, right? Then you had to ask, was it before or after the revelation of Surah An-Nur, which is about lashing? And the other person says, I don't know. He says, I don't know. So even in the narrations, you have this sort of like ambiguity of whether this happened, the idea that the Prophet did stone, which I don't think he did. Did it happen before or after the surah, which then recommends lashing, right? Why is that important? Because if the surah that prescribes lashing happened after, then it obviously means that takes priority and that was abrogated. The idea of stoning was abrogated. And if the lashing was first and the stoning happened after, then it will indicate that it was still continued even after the verse, right? And so that it wasn't abrogated. But my view of it is very simple, right? That look, in Medina there were Jewish communities and who were allowed to continue with their own laws and their own religious practices. And with the Prophet being the default ruler of Medina, things that happened in Medina would later on be attributed to him, even though he wasn't the one who commanded it, right? So some people were stoned in Medina was probably happened by the Jewish people who were there, because that was part of their Torah. And we even have this in some of the narrations, right? That some woman committed zina, and then the Jews came up and said, what's the punishment for it? The Prophet asked them, what's the punishment for it? And they sort of like said, we don't know. They tried to cover it up, and then somebody else was called forward to show that no, what they have is stoning, right? And so after that, this person was stoned. Now, why are the Jews being involved in that? Because it looks like it was an incident that happened among the Jews, right? So they were just following their laws, right? And the Prophet was allowing them to follow their laws in Medina, right? Because that was part of the treaty that he made when he came to Medina, and he did the Constitution of Medina, what was called that. Part of it was that for the Jews will be their deen, their laws, and their way, and for the Muslims theirs, right? So what would happen is just later on, the incidents of stoning that happened in Medina got attributed to the Prophet. Okay, but definitely he didn't do it. He didn't actually have anybody stoned or anything like that.
All right, brother. Okay, thank you. Thank you
Right.
very much for your insightful answers. Yes, I will look into the Reddit links if Allah wills, inshallah, because I wanna deepen my understanding of this topic because I don't know much about hijab, about the covering. That's why I asked on purpose. I know
Yeah.
these other topics too. It was I'm learning, but thank you very much, brother.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And thank you again for coming on. It was good to
Thank you,
hear
my
from
pleasure.
you again. All right.
Likewise, brother.
All right. Okay. Jazakallah khair. Okay.
Yes,
Assalamu
assalamu
alaikum.
alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. All right. Okay. I think we will call it a night unless there's something quick to check on the chat. Assalamu alaikum. Julian Lefranc. Welcome. Yeah, what Zen Islam was saying here, someone who teaches good marriage tactics. Yeah, there's a major void in the ummah for the opposite of Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate, what a thing that was. I mean, is he still? I don't know how much in the media spotlight he is. I know there was just what was the controversy that happened with him? Something that happened. Was it something about Palestine or I don't know? Something happened and his stock among the Muslims tanked or something. But yeah, he was flying high for a while, wasn't he? With Muslims. Don't know why. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad from God. Perfect da'wah. All right, okay. I don't think there's anything else in the chat to look into. So we'll end it there. 2 hours 20. So there's something which I meant to do. I'll put it in the. The problem is I can't pin comments anymore because they've taken that function away from me. So maybe I'll do it in the next live stream. What I've wanted to do is to put all of these these slides which I use on my live streams. I'm going to put the markdown files in a Google Drive, and then so that anybody who wants them can download them. I don't have all of them, right? So it's we've done 100 streams. Unfortunately, some got lost when I changed the laptop or something. But so I don't have all of the files for all of these presentations, but I have almost all of them. Something around like maybe 80 something. So I'll make them available for anybody who wants to use them or just review from them. They are markdown files. The program that I use to view them is Obsidian, but they are basically just markdown text files. So any computer can open them, and you can, if you want, you can use any program to try to see it in the best formatting. So I'll do that for the next live stream. And in fact, the next live stream is actually, I had already decided this, even though there were some people asking about Salah in the beginning of the stream, because of some looks like there's some back and forth going through between various Qur'anists about whether the Salah is a ritual or not. But I was actually thinking of making my next live stream about Salah anyway, right? Not about whether it's a ritual or not. I've already said that I think it's a ritual. But just about, the famous question, how do you pray? How do you pray from the Quran alone, right? So they ask these kind of questions. So I just thought I'd do a stream going through what I think the guidance being given about Salah is in the Quran. And the reason why I thought to do that next, because the next will be 101, right? So this was stream number 100. next one will be 101, and sort of like the 101 question is always about salah. So I thought I'd do a live stream about salah. So that will be next in 2 weeks' time, inshallah. We'll see. Anyway, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much for attending, and see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Oh, quick question here. All right. Can you perform Isha after 12 a.m.? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yeah, no. But again, I'm going to speak about Salah next time. But yeah, you can perform Isha after 12 a.m. That's the short answer. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.